The Daily Beast is reporting on another Trump appointment. They say the following: President-elect Donald Trump will appoint former CNBC host Larry Kudlow to chair the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Kudlow hosted the Kudlow Report on CNBC for 5 years between 2009 and 2014. Kudlow served as Associate Director for Economics and Planning in the Office of Management and Budget during President Ronald Reagan's first term. So Larry Kudlow. He's going with Larry Kudlow. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Larry Kudlow, unless you're like a big-time political junkie and economic junkie. You probably don't watch CNN. There's roughly 33 people in the country that watch CNN, and they're all on Wall Street. Excuse me, not CNN, CNBC. What's wrong with me? Brain, fire up, get working. So, yeah, he's been on CNBC for a long time, and he's a silly person. He also had a radio show for a while. It was actually on the biggest talk radio station here in New York. When I say the biggest talk radio station, that doesn't mean much because talk radio is obviously dead. But his whole thing is, and this is how he sounds, by the way, I'm Larry Kudlow, and we're going to talk about economics and stuff, and I'm such a genius, and I've got the stock market figured out. And this is one of those brilliant people who, now he wasn't on CNBC at the time, at least not with a full-time show, but he's one of the geniuses who would argue before the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession, everything's fine, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, the few economists who've come out and said that there's going to be a crash, I don't think they know what they're talking about. Sour grapes, that's what this is, sour grapes. Sour grapes, a term meaning like, oh, you're down on the market when you shouldn't be, or something like that. Anyway, so he's a silly person. He's wrong about nearly everything. He said about Mitt Romney, he predicted a landslide Mitt Romney victory. Landslide Mitt Romney victory. So he's very astute and in touch with the common man. But let me tell you more about what you need to know about him, because this stuff is really important. So he's for deregulation. He's for tax cuts for the rich. He's for TPP. He would abolish the corporate tax. He is still, to this day, at this super duper late date, he's pro-NAFTA. Fucking NAFTA. In fact, he said the following in 2008. One of the greatest unchallenged political assertions out there right now is that NAFTA costs American jobs. Yeah, that's just factually incorrect. He said about the minimum wage, it, quote, hurts the working poor. And he even supported George W. Bush's attempts to privatize Social Security. So, in other words, this pick from Donald Trump is a pick that goes against every single populist thing that he's ever said. The few times Trump said, hey, we're going to rebuild infrastructure, or we're going to protect Social Security and Medicare, or we're not going to outsource, and I'm against TPP. He's now surrounding himself with a cadre of idiots who are in favor of the opposite of all those things. So he does want to cut Social Security. Larry Kudlow does. He does want to do TPP. He does want to outsource more jobs. So this is an absolute disastrous pick. And yet again, it's kind of exposing that Donald Trump's populist rhetoric was nothing but rhetoric, and it was just an attempt to get votes, an attempt that worked, by the way, because he ended up winning the Electoral College, so he got the votes that he needed to get in order to win. But, he surrounded himself since then with the swamp. He says he's going to drain the swamp. He ain't draining the swamp. He's building a new swamp on the White House lawn. He's got 2 Goldman Sachs people in top positions in his administration, or he picked them for top positions in his administration. Treasury Secretary and control of the budget. So that should fucking scare the shit out of you. The president of Goldman Sachs he picked. Who does that? He picked the CEO of ExxonMobil for Secretary of State. That is fucking lunacy. So the final thing I want to bring up, though, about Larry Kudlow, because, again, I need you to get a full picture of who this guy is and just how disgusting and wrong he's been about everything. In June 2002, Larry Kudlow infamously advocated for the invasion of Iraq to help the stock market. it's bad enough to be for it. It's even worse if you're for it for some gross, selfish, piggy reason about, well, we want stocks to rise, so obviously you should invade a sovereign country that didn't attack us and occupy it for over a decade and kill hundreds of thousands of civilians and set up a worldwide torture regime. Oh, what? That's an immoral thing to say? I mean, think about how deeply immoral that is. I mean, these guys, man, he really is surrounding himself with just horrific characters. And they never learn the lessons of history. I mean, you go back to the Great Depression, and what kind of economic policies were in place that led to it? You had deregulation, you had tax cuts for the rich, you had the smartest guys in the room on Wall Street being able to do whatever the fuck they wanted, and we had the crash. Fast forward to the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession. What happened? Well, we had, between Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, we had round after round of deregulation. Obviously, under Bush, we had tax cuts for the rich also. And eventually that led to a giant crash. So whenever you do voodoo economics, as George H.W. Bush called it, the result is disastrous. So this is Reaganomics. You know, Reagan implemented this stuff too. The economy was great when he was in office because everything took off, but it was fake growth. And as soon as he left office, boom, the bubble burst and we had a big recession. So every time we've implemented Reaganomics or voodoo economics, it's been a boom-bust cycle. The economy takes off and then the bubble pops. Takes off, bubble pops. Because it's all fake growth. It's not sustainable. And it's not like the golden age of economic expansion in the U.S. when right after the Great Depression, or I should say during the Great Depression, we implemented the New Deal reforms and we regulated Wall Street and we put in Glass-Steagall. What happened? We had decades of sustainable growth and no giant downturns. I mean, people forget about that. But the reason why that was the case was we had smart regulations and we had a tax system that benefited the middle class. So even under fucking Eisenhower, a Republican, he was in there during the golden age of economic expansion. You know what the top marginal rate was on the rich? 91%. Now understand, that's not the real rate. That's just the nominal rate. That's what it is on the books. The effective rate was more like 43%. But that's still higher than what we have right now. And it led to sustained economic growth because, yes, you redistributed wealth and people in the middle class and people at the bottom had more money. So they were able to buy the goods that the so-called captains of industry were making, and everything went round and round and round just fine. And you had a wealth distribution where the top 1% was making about 12% of the income, whereas today they're making over 24% of the income. That's unsustainable. So yes, redistribution of wealth, yes, a progressive tax system, it doesn't just benefit the rich, it benefits everybody in society. And you have sustainable growth, and you have good jobs, and you have happier people. Well, now we're going in the opposite direction, and appointing a guy like Larry Kudlow is just begging for another giant economic downturn, and that's exactly what we're going to get at some point. I don't know the exact source of what it's going to be, but it's either going to be from, for example, the student debt crisis, just the regular debt that families have, like credit card debt that families have. Both of those are over $1 trillion each. It could be from derivatives. It could be from the housing market again because we just reinflated the bubble. Whatever it is, there's a million ways. The fundamentals of the economy are not there. So there's a million ways that this thing the bubble can burst and it could just slap us in the face. So appointing guys like Larry Kudlow, putting guys like Larry Kudlow in power, that's a recipe for disaster. There's no good ending to Larry Kudlow being in power because we already know his philosophy, his ideology has failed repeatedly through history, and he refuses to learn the lessons. And he's that disconnected from reality that he would say something like, let's invade Iraq to help the stock market, and I think Mitt Romney's going to win in a landslide.